I'm going to talk about one of the most unsettling painters in art history, Michelangelo Merisi de Caravaggio. A master, a rebel, and a killer. He broke so many rules and created so many masterpieces that his story feels more like a legend than reality. A violent and mysterious genius known for his involvement with criminal organizations, street fights and murders. When you look at his paintings, you see light in its purest form striking people's faces. But at the same time, you sense that darkness is also there, weighing heavily somewhere. Light and shadow, sanctity and violence, beauty and decay. Caravaggio's life, like his paintings, was full of dramatic contrasts. Caravaggio was born September 29, 1571 in Milan. He first lost his father at a young age, and later, his entire family to a plague, an epidemic that wiped out 1/5 of northern Italy. For him, the years in Rome were the beginning of both a meteoric rise and a tragic downfall. Arriving in Rome from Milan in his early 20s, he quickly caught the attention of aristocratic families. His work stood out from other painters due to their raw authenticity and dramatic play of light. Churches, collectors, and nobles began commissioning paintings from him. Caravaggio rose rapidly in the art market of the era, but Rome was also a city that fed his darker side, a life of bohemianism, endless taverns, brothels, and street brawls. Caravaggio became as well known for his sword as he was for his brush. He was involved in a fight almost every month. Sometimes he ended up in prison, other times, he managed to escape the consequences thanks to the support of influential patrons, his big brothers, so to speak. Then came the year 1606. In a duel, Caravaggio killed his rival, Ranuccio Tomasoni. Official records describe it as a fight over honor during a tennis match. Some write it was a gambling dispute, but rumors suggest that behind the scenes, there were gambling debts, a love affair, and reckonings within Rome's underworld. Regardless of the cause, this event changed his life forever. Caravaggio was now a wanted murderer in Rome. Based on court records, biographer Noah Charney says, to put it simply, Caravaggio was a complete jerk. He was likely mentally ill as well, as many commented on his angry, irritable, tense, and unpredictable personality. Even those who wished him well, like his early patron Cardinal del Monte, noted his troublesome behavior. His misdeeds are documented across many pages of court records. He was a terrible tenant. He famously cut holes in the ceiling of his apartment to let in natural light, which also let in snow, rain, and flocks of pigeons. Furthermore, he would threaten and insult his landlord. He was a difficult man, to say the least. We could say Caravaggio lived in a state of mind bordering on sociopathy or perhaps psychopathy. After that murder, his life became a journey filled with constant flight and exile. With that crime, his life in Rome ended. He turned into a fugitive painter whose name inspired fear. Yet, interestingly, even during this period, he never laid down his brush. On the contrary, he created some of his most powerful works during these dark years. In Naples, he quickly found new patrons. He painted scenes that merged the grit of the streets and the faces of ordinary people with sacred stories. When he depicted the calluses on the feet of holy figures or the shadows on their weary faces, church officials were uneasy, but the common people saw their own reality in the paintings. A holy figure's fingernails couldn't be painted as dirty, yet Caravaggio painted them that way. However, Caravaggio's search for peace did not last long. His journey led him to Malta, where he joined the Knights of Malta, one of the most powerful military and religious orders of the time. Imagine, a man who fled Rome after committing murder was now a knight defending holy lands. His fame was so great that the order even granted him a knighthood. But Caravaggio was Caravaggio. He soon got into another fight there. Legend has it that he severely wounded another knight and was imprisoned. Miraculously, he managed to escape. His next stop was Sicily. There, he was no longer just a painter but a master of survival, forming alliances with local powers and seeking protection from influential families. Some sources suggest he even led a small criminal network during this time, a group that protected him and operated on mutual interests. Caravaggio had become a figure sustained by relationships woven in the shadows, and he now had his own syndicate. But the fugitive life carried a heavy price: constant travel, constant enemies, and a soul forever waiting for forgiveness. He made several attempts to return to Rome and receive a papal pardon. Just as hope flickered, something always went wrong. In 1610, at just 38 years old, he died mysteriously. His last painting, St. John the Baptist, was found with him at the time of his death. Caravaggio's life ended as it lived, with brawls, blood, flight, and an uncanny demise. While his life was filled with crimes, it was his brush that made him immortal. He staged a revolution that changed art history. Renaissance painters idealized the human body and face. Figures were nearly flawless, depicted as spotless to represent holiness. Caravaggio did the exact opposite. He brought the sacred down to the streets. He used models from brothels, markets, and the streets for his prophets, saints, and virgins. Tired faces, dirty feet, deep wrinkles, he turned the divine into the human and gave the human a sense of divinity. Of course, this was a scandal at the time. Today, the dramatic effect we call Caravaggio light is technically known as chiaroscuro, or its more extreme version, tenebrism, light emerging suddenly from deep darkness. It is like a spotlight hitting the figures, creating a dramatic intensity that shocks the viewer. He took this technique from Leonardo da Vinci and elevated it to new heights. Light in his paintings was a symbol of divine intervention, fate, or truth, while shadow represented the unknown, the worldly, or the sinful. When you look at his paintings, you find the traces of his violent, bloody life. In The Martyrdom of Saint Matthew, an executioner has pinned the saint to the ground. The fear, pain, and shock on the faces are as authentic as a photograph. We can say he was inspired by the violence he personally witnessed on the streets. His Judith beheading Holofernes is even more striking. The disgust, fear, and determination on Judith's face as she cuts off Holofernes' head are rendered with extraordinary finesse. And perhaps the most haunting example, David with the head of Goliath. Here, David holds the severed head of the giant Goliath, but if you look closely, Goliath's face is Caravaggio's own. The artist painted his own severed head. This was not a mere self-portrait. Some historians see it as a confession of remorse, while others see it as a confrontation with the death that constantly pursued him. Analyzed through a psychoanalytic lens, we see recurring motifs of severed heads, in David and Goliath, the beheading of St. John, and Medusa. From a Freudian perspective, this could be the manifestation of suppressed guilt or death fantasies. The theme of Judith killing Holofernes also evokes the theme of castration anxiety. The story of Judith is ancient. The general Holofernes besieged the city of Bethulia, and just as the city was about to surrender, the beautiful widow Judith entered the enemy camp, enchanted Holofernes, and beheaded him with his own sword while he was drunk. When morning came and the people saw the severed head in the city square, hope was reborn within them. Left without a general, the Assyrian army panicked and fled, and the city was saved from the siege. The courage of a single woman had single-handedly ended a siege that powerful armies could not break. In short, Caravaggio does not merely tell sacred stories in his paintings. He also hides his own fears, his guilt, and his obsessive relationship with death within the canvas. This is why when you look at his paintings, you see not just the hand of an artist, but also the expression of a fragmented and conflicted soul. The severed heads, bloody scenes, and eyes opened wide in terror under dramatic light in his paintings, all of these are the projections of the very life he lived. In fact, we can say that Caravaggio both changed art history and spilled the darkness inside him onto his canvas. Caravaggio brought human fragility, decay, and the bloody truth to the stage. I will show you another painting that is also a religious narrative. But before the painting, let me tell you the story. Now, you see, according to Christian theology, Jesus does not die immediately when he is crucified. He takes the final blow from a Roman soldier's spear. He dies from a spear thrust right into his rib. Or, it is also said that this move was made to check whether he was dead or not. Afterwards, he is buried by his followers, and according to belief, Jesus resurrects 3 days later and appears to his apostles. But at that time, the apostle Thomas is not there. When the other apostles tell Thomas about the situation, Thomas does not believe it, says, "There is no such thing," and adds, "Let's listen to it through Umberto Arte's fluent narration." The apostle Thomas says, "I will not believe he has resurrected unless I see the nail wounds in his hands and stick my finger into the spear wound in his chest." This time, resurrecting again and appearing to Thomas, Jesus, as seen in the painting, grasped Thomas by the wrist and thrust his right index finger into his wound, saying, "Do not be a doubter, be a believer." Upon this event, to Thomas who says, "All right, I believe," Jesus replied, "You have believed because you have seen me, but the truly blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed," dealing him the first reality check in history, he writes. Now look, when we examine the painting, Thomas's excitement, those famous Caravaggio shadows falling on the clothes, the nail wounds on Jesus's hands, and the spear wound on his chest appear with tremendous dramatic intensity and realism. Furthermore, there is also a piece of information in this book stating that to paint this work, Caravaggio secretly dug up a newly buried corpse and used it as a model. According to Elizabeth Landon's account, while working on the exhumed corpse, the workers, bothered by the foul stench, wanted to drop the body. But Caravaggio drew his sword and threatened them with death. And because they were absolutely certain that Caravaggio would not hesitate to use his sword, they were forced to hold the corpse upright until the painting was finished. Yes, he was a genius, mad and hungry for reality, who would have a decaying corpse propped up by the power of a sword for the sake of his art. But Caravaggio applied this ruthless, unfiltered reality not only to others, but to himself as well. Now, let's move on to the story of sick Bacchus. According to some historical records, during those times, Caravaggio was kicked by a horse, suffering a severe leg injury, and was admitted to the Santa Maria della Consolazione hospital because of this injury. An infection from the horse kick, blood loss, or another illness he contracted in the hospital had left him in such a jaundiced and emaciated state. After leaving the hospital, he found a mirror, placed it in front of him, and painted his own reflection. He did not hesitate to transfer not only corpses, but his own sickly body, onto canvas. But instead of portraying himself as the ideal, flawless, and handsome figure of earlier Renaissance artists, he again chose the harsh truth, a sick, pale, and battered body. The figure of Bacchus was a fitting alter ego for Caravaggio as he was the deity of wine, theater, ritualized displays of ecstasy, and was synonymous with inspiration and destruction. The portrait differs, however, from traditional representations of Bacchus where he is depicted in the midst of unbridled celebration, often in a verdant landscape. Instead, Caravaggio's image adheres to the conventions of many of the artist's other works, presenting the mythological figure in a sparse interior. Furthermore, the figure's pallor and sitting pose suggest not a deity in his prime, but rather someone enduring the consequences of overindulgence. Indeed, the ivy leaves encircling the Bacchus's head have started to wither, a few of the grapes in his hands have begun to shrivel. Just a few years after Sick Bacchus, Caravaggio returns to the same subject. The artist has now recovered, found influential patrons, is well fed, and the colors on his palette have come to life. This new Bacchus is not sick, on the contrary, his cheeks are rosy, his body is full, and his posture is self-satisfied. But is everything so flawless? Of course not. Let's take a closer look at the painting. This is just an ordinary Roman street urchin, wrapped in a bedsheet that has yellowed from dirt. Dirty nails, Bacchus is not on clouds or a velvet throne. If you look closely, you can see a dirty, striped mattress, the kind used in poor homes of the era, peeking out from under that white covering beneath him. As vivid as the colors are, the fruit basket on the table still screams Caravaggio's dark philosophy. The apple is worm-eaten and rotting, the pomegranate has burst and is starting to spoil, and the leaves are withering. Even look at the wine glass, there are small ripples on the surface of the wine. This suggests the model grew tired of posing for hours with that heavy goblet and that their hand is trembling. Caravaggio is telling us, don't be fooled by the youth, the beauty, and these vibrant colors. Like these fruits you see, life itself is doomed to decay and perish at any moment. Each of his works has its own unique, fact-based story. These two paintings represent a completely different period in Caravaggio's art and life, a darker, deeper one, and the closest he came to death. The two works you see depict the same subject, Saint Jerome, who translated the Bible into Latin. Earlier Renaissance artists painted him with a lion by his side, a magnificent cardinal's hat on his head, and a divine glow. The artist is playing an incredible psychological game here. Jerome's round, bald head is the same shape as the skull. This is one of the harshest slaps in art history of the memento mori, or remember you must die, philosophy. Life and death are at the same table, face to face. Now look at the other painting, Saint Jerome in meditation. Zoom in on the model's wrinkles, sagging skin, and protruding collarbones. Caravaggio makes us feel the decay in this man's body. These paintings are the confrontation of a death that haunts an artist who lives in fear of receiving a sword wound or killing someone, who goes to bed with a sword. Even after his death, Caravaggio's legacy spread rapidly. His language of light and shadow soon began to be imitated all across Europe. His followers, known as the Caravaggisti, fueled the dramatic vein of Baroque painting. Ultimately, Caravaggio emerges as both a genius and a criminal, the master of light and the child of darkness. His paintings remind us that the human soul is never composed of a single color, we all carry both light and shadow within us.